I was just fixing her fence. Then she turned to me and asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" That one question changed everything I thought I knew about love. I wasn't supposed to be there that afternoon. I had planned to spend the day fixing my own fence, the one that leaned like it was tired of standing straight. But when Mrs. Turner from 2 houses down waved at me and said her neighbor needed help, I grabbed my toolbox without thinking too much about it. That's how things usually started in this town, small favors that turned into long afternoons. Her place sat at the edge of the gravel road, where the trees grew thicker and the noise of the highway faded into a distant hum. The fence around her yard was old, weathered, and broken in places, like it had survived a few storms too many. I could see immediately why she needed help. One good wind and half of it would come down. She stood on the porch when I arrived, arms crossed loosely, watching me park my truck. She wasn't dressed up, just jeans, an oversized sweater, and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, but there was something calm about her presence. The kind of calm that made you feel like the world slowed down a little when she was nearby. "Hi," she said, stepping down from the porch. "You must be the guy Mrs. Turner sent." "That's me," I replied. "I'm Jake." "Emma," she said, offering a small smile. "Thanks for coming. I didn't think anyone would actually show up." I shrugged. Fence looked like it could use saving. She laughed quietly, and for some reason, that sound stuck with me. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just real. We walked along the fence line together as she pointed out the worst spots. A post here, a broken board there. As she talked, I noticed the small details, the way she tucked her hands into her sleeves, the faint dirt smudge on her cheek, the tired look in her eyes that suggested she'd been handling things on her own for a long time. "I can fix most of this today," I said after a quick inspection. "Might need to replace a couple of posts, though." "That's fine," she said. "I'm just glad someone knows what they're doing." I got to work, pulling out old nails and lining up new boards. The sun was warm, and the air smelled like dry grass and wood. For a while, neither of us said much. She sat on the steps, watching, occasionally handing me tools when I asked. "You do this kind of work often?" she asked after a while. "More than I planned," I said. "Moved back here a year ago. Been picking up odd jobs since." She nodded slowly. "Must be nice, working with your hands. Seeing something broken turn solid again." I didn't know why, but that comment hit deeper than it should have. I kept my eyes on the fence. "Yeah, it is." As the afternoon went on, the silence between us became comfortable. Not awkward, not forced, just easy. She brought me a glass of cold lemonade, and when our fingers brushed as I took it, I felt a strange jolt, like my body noticed something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. "Careful," she said lightly. "It's cold." "So am I joked, and she laughed again. I was hammering in the last board when she came to stand beside me, shading her eyes as she looked at the work. "It already looks better," she said. "Thank you." "Really? No problem," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. That fence wasn't going to give up without a fight. She smiled, then hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. I noticed the shift immediately. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She looked at the ground for a moment, then back at me. Her voice was casual, almost too casual. "Do you have a girlfriend?" The question landed heavier than the hammer in my hand. I wasn't expecting it, not from her, not out of nowhere like that. For a second, my mind scrambled for the right answer, not because it was complicated, but because it suddenly felt important. "No," I said honestly. "I don't." "Oh," she replied, a little too quickly. I was curious." I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. "What about you?" She let out a short breath. "No, not anymore." There was something final in the way she said it, like the chapter had closed whether she was ready or not. We stood there for a moment, the air between us charged with unspoken thoughts. The fence was done, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to move on. "Well," I said eventually, forcing a light tone, your fence should survive the next apocalypse. She smiled, but her eyes stayed on me a second longer than necessary. I owe you. You already paid me in lemonade, I said. She laughed. At least let me cook you dinner sometime. As a thank you. My heart picked up its pace, and I hoped she didn't notice. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. As I packed up my tools and walked back to my truck, I felt something shift inside me. Like a door I didn't know existed had cracked open. I glanced back once, and she was still standing there, watching me leave, her arms wrapped around herself. I didn't know it then, but that broken fence was the smallest thing I would ever fix for her. And that question, do you have a girlfriend, was the beginning of something that would change both of our lives in ways neither of us was ready for. Dinner turned out to be 3 days later. Not because either of us backed out, but because life had a habit of stretching simple plans into something heavier. When I pulled into her driveway that evening, the sun was already sinking behind the trees, washing everything in soft orange light. Her house looked different at dusk, warmer somehow, like it was holding its breath. She opened the door before I could knock. You're early, she said, surprised but smiling. Didn't want to risk being late, I replied. Figured first impressions still matter, even if I've already fixed your fence. She laughed and stepped aside to let me in. The inside of her house smelled like garlic and herbs, something baking slowly. It felt lived in, not staged. Books stacked on the coffee table, a throw blanket folded neatly on the couch, framed photos along the wall, mostly landscapes, a few of her smiling with people I didn't recognize. Hope you're hungry, she said, heading back to the kitchen. I skipped lunch just in case, I joked. She glanced over her shoulder. Smart man. We talked while she finished cooking. Small things at first, how long she'd lived here, how strange it was adjusting to quiet after living in the city. She'd moved back 2 years ago, after her marriage ended. She didn't go into details, and I didn't push. I could hear it in her voice, the careful way she chose her words, that it still hurt. Dinner was simple but perfect. Pasta, fresh bread, a bottle of wine she admitted she'd been saving for, a day that felt worth it. That sentence sat between us longer than anything else she said. We ate at the small dining table near the window. Conversation flowed easier than I expected. We laughed, shared stories, filled in the empty spaces naturally. It didn't feel like a first date. It felt like catching up with someone you somehow already knew. At one point, she rested her chin on her hand and studied me. What? I asked. Nothing, she said. Just, you're not what I expected. Good or bad? She smiled softly. Good. Refreshingly good. Something tightened in my chest. I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone looked at me like that, not evaluating, not judging, just seeing. After dinner, we moved to the porch. The air was cooler now, the crickets loud in the distance. She brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Can I ask you something? She said again, her voice quieter this time. I smiled faintly. Seems fair. I survived the last question. She hesitated. Why did you move back? I stared out at the yard, the fence line barely visible in the dim light. My dad got sick. I came to help for a few months. Then he passed, and I just stayed. Turns out running from things doesn't work if they're already inside you. She nodded slowly. I know that feeling. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't heavy. It felt shared. Over the next few weeks, seeing her became routine in the best way. Coffee in the mornings when our schedules lined up. Long walks down the dirt road in the evenings. Small touches, her hand brushing mine, her shoulder leaning into me when we laughed, that meant more than they should have. I started fixing things around her place without being asked. A loose step, a leaky faucet. She teased me about it, called me her unofficial handyman, but I could tell she appreciated it. Maybe not just the repairs, but the presence. One night, after a particularly long walk, We stopped near the fence I'd fixed. The moonlight cast shadows across the wood. You know, she said, that fence feels like a metaphor. For what? For me, she admitted. Broken in places. Holding on anyway. I turned to her. You're not broken. She met my gaze. You don't really get to decide that. I reached out, hesitated for half a second, then gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. Maybe, I said quietly, but I can decide I don't see you as something that needs fixing. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she squeezed my hand. That was the night we kissed. Not rushed, not dramatic, just a slow, careful crossing of a line we'd both been standing near for a while. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, I admitted. But fear didn't stop us. It never really does, not when something feels right. Still, shadows from her past lingered. Sometimes she'd pull away without explanation. Sometimes she'd go quiet, lost in thoughts she didn't share. I learned not to push, but it was hard. I wanted to be her safe place, not another weight. One afternoon, I showed up unexpectedly with groceries. She opened the door, eyes red, clearly having been crying. Hey, I said softly. What's wrong? She shook her head. I can't do this today. I stepped inside anyway, setting the bags down. Then don't. Just let me sit with you. She didn't argue. She curled up on the couch, and I sat beside her. After a long while, she spoke. He called, she said. My ex. He wants to come back. Says he's changed. I felt something twist in my stomach. And what do you want? She looked at me, really looked at me. I don't know. Part of me is still that woman who promised forever. Another part of me finally feels like she can breathe. I took her hand again. You don't owe anyone a decision tonight. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is. You won't, I said, though a small voice inside me wasn't so sure. That night, when I left her house, I realized something important. Fixing fences was easy. Fixing hearts, especially ones that had been hurt before, was something else entirely. And I didn't yet know whether love would be enough when the past came knocking. The past didn't come knocking politely. It arrived the way it always does, unexpected, loud, and determined to be heard. I was halfway through repairing a shed roof across town when my phone buzzed. Emma's name lit up the screen. She rarely called during the day. Hey, I answered, stepping down the ladder. Can you come over? She asked. Her voice was tight, strained. I really need you right now. I didn't ask questions. I told the homeowner I'd be back later, tossed my tools in the truck, and drove faster than I should have. Her driveway was crowded when I arrived. A car I didn't recognize sat near the porch. My chest tightened before I even cut the engine. Emma opened the door before I reached it. Her face was pale, eyes glassy. He's here, she whispered. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. Do you want me to leave? She shook her head immediately. No, please, don't. Inside, he stood near the living room window. Tall, well-dressed, confident in a way that came from knowing you once had power over someone. He turned when he heard us. So this is him, he said, looking me up and down. The handyman. I ignored the comment and focused on Emma. You okay? She nodded, but her hand found mine, gripping tightly. I just want to talk, he said. Privately. Emma took a breath. No, you can say whatever you need to say here. Something in her tone surprised even me. It was firm, grounded. He scoffed. You're really going to let him sit in on this? She straightened. I'm not letting anyone do anything. This is my house, my life. He hesitated, then sighed like he was the tired one. I made mistakes. I know that. But I'm ready now. Therapy. New job. I want my wife back. Silence filled the room. I'm not your wife anymore, Emma said quietly. And I don't want to be. He looked at her like she'd slapped him. Because of him. She shook her head. Because of me. Because I finally learned what it feels like not to be afraid all the time. His gaze flicked to me again, this time sharper. You think he's going to save you. Men like him don't last. Emma let go of my hand and stepped forward. He's not here to save me. He's here because he chooses to be. That was it. The moment everything shifted. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his keys, and left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Emma stood there, trembling. I moved to her, wrapping my arms around her as she broke down. She cried hard, the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. I'm so tired, she whispered. Of being strong. You don't have to be, I said. Not with me. The weeks that followed weren't magically easy, but they were honest. Emma started therapy again, not because she was broken, but because she wanted clarity. I stayed close, supportive, never pushing for more than she could give. One evening, months later, we stood by the fence again. The wood had settled, firm and straight. I used to think love was about fixing each other, she said. Turns out it's about standing together while you fix yourself. I smiled. Guess that makes sense. She turned to me. You know, when I asked if you had a girlfriend, I wasn't just curious. I figured. I was hoping you'd say no, she admitted. Because something about you felt safe. Like home. I took her hands. You are my home. That was the night I stayed. Not as a visitor. Not as the guy who fixed her fence. But as the man who chose her, every day. A year later, we replaced the fence entirely. New wood. New posts. Stronger than before. As we worked side by side, she looked at me and smiled. Funny how a broken fence led to all this. I kissed her forehead. Best repair job I ever took. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the world feels quiet again, she still turns to me and asks questions. But now, the answers are easy.